Kentucky Indians, Shawnee, Jerry E. Clark. Continuing. The land policy of the United States was based on the theory that all the land was held by the natives. So they're trying to provide cover for their justification. Right? Which is all they're doing, is just providing cover. The land policy of the U.S. was based on the theory that all land was held by the natives. It became necessary to adopt some procedure to extinguish Indian rights to such territory as the Americans desired. Until 1871, the tribes were recognized as independent nations, and land titles were extinguished only by formal treaties. Since tribes were actually not independent nations with well-defined boundaries and centralized leadership, no one individual had the authority to transfer by sale the soil on which his tribe lived. But to satisfy the fiction of the legal transfer, the Americans needed only to find or create a headman who claimed such authority. So they're actually like creating a puppet government, sort of like what America did in Vietnam. Go there, plan a government, say that you're defending that government even though those are your people. Many of the treaties with the Shawnee were obtained by threat or fraud, and by 1830 the Ohio Shawnee were confined to two small reservations in the northwestern corner of that state. 2 years later, the Shawnee had ceded the United States all their land east of the Missouri River. Conclusion. Although the Shawnee gave up any claim to land in Kentucky in 1795, they had a profound influence on the early history, traditions, and legends of the state. Unfortunately, much of the early record is marred by a hatred and hostility between them and the settlers that led to the description of Kentucky as the dark and bloody ground. As land speculators and settlers trickled and then swarmed over the Appalachian Mountains, the Shawnee fought hard to retain their hunting territory and homeland. The Shawnee also became a victim in the colonial land struggle between Pennsylvania and Virginia that resulted in Lord Dunmar's War. The result was that a militia was sent to protect the settlers. The Kentucky militiamen pursued Shawnee raiding parties and often mounted counter raids on Shawnee villages as far north as the Little Miami River in Ohio. These conflicts involved such men as George Rogers Clark, Anthony Wayne, William Henry Harrison, Daniel Boone. The major adversaries of these military leaders were Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, the prophet. Tecumseh gathered a force from several tribes and made raids on the Kentucky settlements of Blue Licks on the Kentucky River and Bryan Station north of the present city of Lexington. Long after most Shawnee made their peace with the Americans, Tecumseh continued his struggle until his death at the Battle of Thames during the War of 1812. So Tecumseh made raids into Kentucky at the settlement of Blue Licks. So by the time he died at the Battle of Thames during the War of 1812, by this time he'd been made a general in the British Army. So Tecumseh was General Tecumseh. Conflicts with the Shawnee have also become part of the history and legend of Daniel Boone. Separating fact from fiction regarding the man of Boone's stature is difficult. However, it is known that he was respected by the Shawnee for his tenacity. Both Boone and his daughter were captured by the Indians. His daughter was immediately recovered, but his own captivity saw him taken to Ohio, where he was adopted by the Shawnee. Tales of his surviving the gauntlet have become part of Boone's legend. He survived the gauntlet, so that makes Daniel Boone more powerful, sort of like Simon Kitten and Simon Girty. Other legends and stories of Shawnee captivity are a part of Kentucky's early history. These stories contain tales of depredations and heroics that inevitably spring from the struggles any people make to conquer and settle an area. Probably the best known is the story of Jenny Wiley, who survived several months of Shawnee captivity, even after the Shawnee had killed her children. How much truth there is to these legends is irrelevant. They reflect the hatred and fear that the early settlers felt towards the Shawnee. Another legend from eastern Kentucky is less negative in character. From 1760 to 1770, a man named Jonathan Swift was supposed to have worked some silver mines in the vicinity of Mud Lick Creek in Johnson County. The exact location is not known, but there was a guy that came back later on, said he was a Cornstalk's descendant looking for it. The Shawnee reputation in medicine was picked up by the early settlers who had left their doctors in the east. Snake root, willow bark, sassafras root, and ginseng root were among the numerous substances whose medicinal qualities were well known to Shawnee doctors. The early settlers learned how to prepare and use the plants from the Shawnee, and many Kentuckians still rely on these native medicines to cure common ailments. Attention was drawn to the salt resources of the Ohio Valley by the Shawnee, who manufactured and traded the commodity. With the curtailment of foreign imports, the settlers learned from the Shawnee the location of valuable salt licks, although other mineral resources eventually became much more important on the Allegheny frontiers. Salt was the first major industrial enterprise. Shawnee trails crisscrossed the state of Kentucky and facilitated the settlement of the region. The most important was the Great Warrior's Path, which led through the Cumberland Gap, opening Kentucky to the Virginians. The Cumberland Trail connected the Ohio River to the Cumberland River at Nashville. In the western part of the state, the Russellville-Shawneetown Trail led to Illinois. The early settlements of Harrodsburg and Boonesborough were situated on these Indian trails. General Anthony Wayne's victory over the Shawnee at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794 virtually ended Shawnee influence in Kentucky. Subsequent Treaty of Greenville, signed by Blue Jacket and Blackhoof in 1795, forced the Shawnee to give up all claims to land south of the Ohio River. Many had given these up long before this, but this treaty closed to the Shawnee the only territory they could possibly consider as a homeland. A few remained on 2 reservations in northwestern Ohio, but in 1832 and 1833 they were forced to leave for a reservation in Kansas. A new chapter was thus initiated in Shawnee history as they were pushed onto reservations and prohibited from pursuing their traditional nomadic way of life. By 1867, they were confined to 3 small reservations in Oklahoma with no control over their own identity, living off meager annuity payments for land taken from them by fraud and force. For over 100 years, this once proud people has lived in virtual poverty, victim of the manifest destiny of a land-hungry civilization. So by 1867, they were on 3 tiny reservations in Oklahoma. That's where the Shawnee were put when they were originally from Kentucky. This is their homeland. They belong here, right? This is their land. Skippakentucky, KentuckyExplorer.com talks about John Finley was another trader who came to Kentucky. In 1752, he set out with 4 white servants from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So John Finley is a Pennsylvania trader, Pennsylvania fur trader, and he's got 4 white servants. So he's got 4 slaves with him. John Finley and his 4 white slaves. His trade goods were packed in canoes. They paddled down the Ohio River to the falls, where Louisville is located today, to trade with the Indians, but no Indians showed up. There's a sign here that's a Kentucky history marker. 1274 in Clark County marks the appropriate location of the Shawnee Indian settlement of Skippakentucky. It says Indian oil fields, site of Skippakentucky, sometimes called Kentucky, located on the Warrior's Path. This meeting place for traders and Indian hunters was the last of the Kentucky Indian towns occupied by the Shawnees, c. 1715 to 1754. John Finley had a store here. John Finley had a store. He had a store, and he traded with the Indians. 1752. Daniel Boone viewed the beautiful level of Kentucky from this point on June 7th, 1769. So John Finley's got his 4 servants. He comes to Louisville, near what is Boone County. As they returned, they met some Shawnees coming from Illinois, and they invited Finley to trade at Skippakentucky. They said that there was a branch of the Ohio River called the Kentucky, which would lead to their village. The Kentucky River would lead to their village in the Skippakentucky. So I think they're in it licking rivers. I don't know. There's some rivers over there. I'm trying to whatever. So they were in Boone County at the Salt Licks, Big Bone Lick, right? The Iroquois Indian traders called this level land where Skippakentucky stood Kentucky, Kenta meaning level, and Tucky meaning meadowland, so level meadowland. The Iroquois called the Kentucky River by the same name because it led to this Kentucky place, or level plain, where they traded with the Shawnees. So they're making it sound like it's off the Kentucky River. Maybe that was just the river that they call Kentucky. I don't know. It was the Licking River, Kentucky River, Big Sandy, Little Sandy, Cumberland River. White settlers made their settlements, although they weren't exactly welcome, near all along the Kentucky River except Harrodsburg, which was only 5 miles from the river. The settlements were spoken of as Kentucky settlements. Later the state was called Kentucky. Finley and his men followed the Shawnees up the Kentucky River to Howard's Creek. They carried their goods in from there. He carelessly tossed aside some of the dried English hay in which his goods were packed, and today we call this dried hay bluegrass. Early settlers in Pennsylvania had brought the seed over from England. This was probably the first bluegrass to grow in Kentucky, so John Finley was the reason why we got bluegrass in this state. John Finley built a stockade for his furs, and he stayed at Skippy-Kankakee until January 1753. He was building up a good trade when a band of Ottawa Indians descended on a scalping expedition. So he's saying that Ottawa Indians attacked him, and then 3 of Finley's servants were taken captive. His furs were stolen, and all the goods were taken. And he and one servant, John Faulkner, were away that day and escaped. They then headed back to Pennsylvania. When a record was made of the incident, it was stated that Kentucky had been in Kentucky. Kentucky, the way it's spelled now. The first time this territory was spoken of as such. So he was the first person to interpret the Skippy-Kankakee being the land of Kentucky, the Kentucky River, Kentucky, the Shawnee town, Shawnee. It says the Iroquois and Indian traders called it Kentucky, Kentucky meaning level, Kentucky. I don't know. So, Finley enlisted on the English side of the French and Indian War of 1755. Here he met a young wagoner from the Carolinas named Daniel Boone. Finley's stories intrigued Boone, and Finley promised to take him to Skippy-Kankakee. It was no longer safe to go by way of the Ohio River, and at that time, so in May 1769, Finley led Boone and some other men through Pound Gap, not Cumberland Gap, into Kentucky. Finley became ill, so Boone built him a shelter and laid food beside him, then pushed on through Powell's Valley until he found the Red River Trail. This he followed to Pilot Knob in present-day Powell County. From there, on June 7, 1769, Daniel Boone looked down at the stretch of level bluegrass fields beyond and felt sure he had found the Skippy-Kankakee. He hurried back to tell Finley, who was so cheered that he went with Boone. They and the other hunters all went to Skippy-Kankakee together. However, they divided up into 2 groups of 2 so as not to attract the attention of Indians or scare the game. Upon arrival, they found the village had been burned to the ground. When camped along Lawbegrund Creek, one of the men read to the others from a book he had brought along called Gulliver's Travels. Gulliver escaped from his enemies at Lawbegrund Creek. So far, they had escaped from the Indians and thought it was a good name for the creek where they camped. They stayed at Boonesboro for a while. One day, Boone invited Golf to hunt in Paradise for Hunters, a former region of the Skippy-Kankakee. When they got to a spring on what later became Golf land, Golf raised his rifle to aim at a deer that had just come to the spring. Golf was surprised to hear the crack of a rifle from another direction and saw the deer fall. An Indian rushed from behind some bushes and proceeded down to the spring to bleed his trophy. Fortunately, the Indian had not noticed Golf, who felt that this was not an opportune time to hunt. Before you could say Skippy-Kankakee, Golf and Boone hastily made their way back to Boonesboro. Another time, they returned another time, and they were getting attacked again. Boone helped settle in Boonesboro. I don't get... The Indians never saw a Negro before. They're chasing the Negro around because they never saw him. Golf went to settle in the Skippy-Kankakee. Later, he bought land and settled there. His son Elisha inherited the land later on. They renamed it the Indian Old Cornfields. Blackhoof was born in the early 1700s. Died in 1831. In the 1816, Blackhoof came back barefooted from the Indian reservation in Ohio. He pointed out to the white settlers many places of interest in the former village. He told the settlers that while he was fighting in the French and Indian War, he had shot repeatedly at George Washington. He decided that Washington bore a charmed life. He was never able to hit him. So Blackhoof tried to kill George Washington, but he couldn't do it. Blackhoof was born in the early 1700s, died in 1831. He fought at Oriskany, was present at Braddock's defeat, and fought Mad Anthony Wayne. Blackhoof was born in Kentucky. Remember that.